Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? If you're a Gen Xer like me, you have seen a phenomenal change in the amount of media that's available to us if we want to be informed or entertained. And this cornucopia of choice hasn't just opened up the world to us in terms of what do we want to watch, what do we want to listen to, but also it's defined us differently as a culture, and it's defining us as a culture much, much differently than it did not so long ago. What the hell do I mean? Come with me down the rabbit hole for a few minutes. The other day, I was watching a video by Dan Coe. He is a YouTube creator with well over 1 million followers. And he said something very interesting. He's 28-ish or something like that. And he was talking about the remarkable change that's happened since in his lifetime, where originally TV only had about 300 channels on, and now there are millions of channels you can watch when it comes to YouTube, Netflix, everything else that's on the internet. There's no shortage of choice. And of course, I chuckle a little bit, and if you're around my age, you're probably chuckling too. And it's not Dan's fault that he's chronologically challenged. He just had a different experience than you or I had. And I believe that the difference in my experience and Dan's experience isn't just one of scale. Although, in order to explain what I mean, I'm going to have to talk about the scale. So let's back up a little bit. I'm 57 years old. So originally, when I was a kid, there were maybe somewhere between 3 and 7 channels you could get on television. That was it. 7 on a really good day. It was something like Channel 8 and Channel 3 and UHF Channel 61 and 20 and 61 and 30. And sometimes you could get Channel 9 or Channel 4 or Channel 5 if you were lucky. And it really depended on many things, like where you were. At my house, I could only get a few channels. And we had this giant antenna on our roof, and you had to spin this little dial, and the thing went, whoa, 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 whoa. Some of you can remember this. And it would kind of point to, the best place for that signal. If I was at my grandmother's house, only a few miles away, the channels came in a lot better. But essentially, the bottom line was everybody watched the same thing. That's all that was on. And so me and the kids at school, there were only a few different channels that we wouldn't necessarily watch things on. So everybody watched Happy Days. Everybody watched MASH. These were the things that were on. Everybody watched the same Saturday morning cartoons. When you're in high school and you're in history class, they would give you an assignment sometimes to watch 60 Minutes or a Gronsky and Company or something like that, to watch a news channel and then report on it, because that was what was on. There wasn't a lot of variety available to us. And so everybody kind of watched the same thing. And even the different channels, some of them were from a different state, so you're kind of watching the same thing, and maybe you're watching reruns. There was a TV guide, and our newspaper had something very similar, but it told you everything that was going to be on for the entire week on all the channels. And sometimes, if it was a rerun especially, it would give you a synopsis of what the show was going to be about. So you're like, oh, I've already seen this one. You didn't have to watch it. Pretty wild. We all watched Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Everybody had this commonality of experience. And then later on, cable came around, and we had 24 channels to choose from. Or no, it was 36. And not all of them worked. But one of the interesting things that happened was, of course, we see sometimes there was a lot of repeats because it was just a channel from a different state. But we got this other channel called HBO. And at that time, and I can't tell you the exact date, it was in the 80s, HBO had very few movies on. So if you watched HBO for a few days in a row and just watched whatever was on, you saw all of them. So I can't tell you the amount of times that I and my friends watched 48 Hours. I can recite that movie, line by line, I'm pretty sure. Quit Calling Me Jack happens to be my name. Or Animal House. Or I think we watched, maybe it was Pretty Baby and Blue Lagoon, and what else was on? The New Adventures of Billy, Sundance Kid, all that kind of stuff. Why can't I remember the name of that? There were various movies that everybody watched because these were the only things that were on, and that changed very slowly. Later on, there was this channel called MTV that showed up. And I think it was like about 1983 or so. And we would get home from school, from junior high school or high school, and we put that on. And if you sat in front of MTV for about an hour and a half, you watched all the videos that were on, all of them. And so it's very nostalgic, even if you don't like the bands and you're of an age, to find a playlist where all of these old songs, Haircut 100, Love Plus One, and Adam Ant Music, or all the various things that were on, because these were the only things that were on. I think the Psychedelic Furs, Pretty in Pink, was the first thing I saw on MTV. But we all had the same commonality of experience. Even the music that was on the radio was rather limited. You know, there's payola was a real thing, and so like everybody heard the stuff off the Michael Jackson's Thriller album. There were definitely songs that kind of defined an era. To a certain extent, and yes, there were several different channels, and you could go on the AM radio, and you could hear all the really weird, conspiracy theorists if you got to the right shows and what have you. But it was still rather limited. There was the country station, and there were the rock stations, and you maybe would hear one or two hits off the album. But if you wanted to hear the rest of the album, you had to go buy it. And that's the only way you were going to be able to hear the other songs on the album. Or either that, or if your friend did and you taped the album. And so the commonality of experience for a lot of us was the same. There were these various songs that played all the time on the radio, and whether you liked them or not, you heard them. So they became, defining things for all of us. Everybody my age, at least in the United States, they experienced the same thing to a large degree. And maybe, yeah, sure, maybe we went after certain pursuits as far as like what kind of albums we bought, so our experiences were a little bit different, or the things that we liked, or the movies that we liked. But for the most part, we all saw and heard the same stuff. And it's really, became really interesting later on, when I, had my kids and we had the cable where it didn't have 300 channels at that time, but it had a bunch. And all of a sudden there were more things available. And I started to notice that my kids and their friends, while they watched most of the same things, and while my friends and I watched most of the same things, there was some bifurcation because there was option. There were choices that we had. And as the internet was new, and continuing to watch stuff now, watching what my friends watch now, and I finally stopped watching TV altogether, but what my girlfriend's kids watch, and then what some of my kids' friends watch and listen to, it's so different. They don't have the same commonality of experience. Yes, there's certain touchstones, and certain things become very popular. And, everybody's watching Bluey if you're a little kid now. And I just looked after somebody's kids at a meeting the other day, and I knew what Bluey was, so we pulled up Bluey on my phone. They knew what it was too. But there are so many options. And so for the first time, as a culture, we are becoming incredibly fractured in terms of what we consume. So we don't have the same commonality of experience as the person next to us, especially the younger people. This is really quite fascinating to watch. I'm not saying this is bad or this is good. There are good parts, like there's all this variety, and we can go and choose what we really interest us. And at the same time, there's this loss of, dare I say, community, or this commonality of experience that kind of binds us. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's a thing. It's a thing to be aware of. And in news, it can be even more profound because we all kind of watch the same news stations. And there were some that leaned one way or the other, but there were only a few of them. And now news is, or what passes for news, is available from so many different sources. And when you compare them, you're wondering if this is even news from the same planet. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole and make commentary on that. That might be for a different video. But the real point of this video is just it's so different, the experiences, the inputs that we all have. And as older people, I can see the differences already in us, but in the generations after us, it's quite profound and fascinating to watch. So for the first time, as members of a small community or a larger community, various individuals don't have anything close to the same experience. This is fascinating. Is it a little bit worrying? Yeah, I suppose a little bit. But, it's interesting to see what's going to happen next as a result of this. You know what I mean?